Right. Oops, let me try that again. I now call to order the Planning Commission meeting of November 17th, 2021. If everyone would please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And if you could remain standing for the reading of the Statement of Values by Secretary Harrow.
One moment, please.
I should have waited till the flag was up. Well,
As we gather, we humbly seek blessings upon this meeting. May we act with strength, courage, and the will to perform our obligations and duties to our people with justice to all. Let us seek wisdom so that we may act in the best interest of our people, our neighbors, and our country. All this we ask so we may serve our community with fairness and respect, putting their needs before all.
thank you, Secretary Harrow. Elizabeth, could you please call the roll?
Yes. Chair Biagini,
Here.
Commissioner Cherukuru,
Here.
Commissioner Hero,
Here.
Commissioner Wang,
Here.
Commissioner Akazi,
Present.
Commissioner Salame,
Here.
Commissioner Bhatnagar.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to the declaration of commission procedures. Secretary Harrow.
Public hearings are conducted by the chair in accordance with the following procedures. The chair of the commission directs all activity during the hearings. All comments shall be addressed to the commission. Any item on this agenda may be continued to a subsequent hearing. Applicants will be allotted up to 10 minutes to present and justify proposals. Following staff presentation of an item, other speakers will be given up to 2 minutes. The applicant is allotted up to 5 minutes for rebuttal of comments. No additional comments will be accepted upon the close of public hearing. Although the commission reserves the right to direct questions to any speaker on any matter. Special procedures, time limits may be applied to any items as prescribed by the chair. An appeal of commission actions must be filed in writing within 7 calendar days.
Thank you, Commissioner and Secretary Harrow. So copies of the current agenda and staff reports for each of the items on the agenda are available from the Planning Division office on the Friday afternoon preceding the meeting, and they're also available online. Continuances and exceptions. This part of the meeting allows for applicants, members of the public, or other interested parties to request an item be 1, continued without hearing, 2, withdrawn, or 3, taken out of order. So are there any requests, applicants, the public, or the commission for a continuance or exception for any of the items on tonight's agenda?
Chair, there are no requests.
Okay, and then just a note, the Planning Commission has 7 members. Whenever the full commission is not present, applicants do have the option to continue their item to another meeting, but we have all 7 tonight. So we will now move to the consent calendar. Commissioner Secretary Harrow, could you read that procedure?
Sure. The procedure for the consent calendar is as follows. Consent calendar items may be enacted, approved, or adopted by one motion unless requested to be removed by anyone for discussion or explanation. If any member of the Planning Commission, the staff, the applicant, or a member of the public wishes to comment on a consent calendar item or would like the item to be heard on the regular agenda, make this request now, as items listed on the consent calendar with associated file numbers constitute public hearing items. Any requests?
Chair, I think maybe it's appropriate for me to recuse from the minutes because I joined so late. It doesn't make sense.
No problem. Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Ikezi. Then Commissioner Harrow, you want to read what's on the consent calendar?
Sure, consent calendar items. The only item is item 1A, would be the Planning Commission meeting minutes of October 27th, 2021.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
it. I'll second it.
Okay. You got that, Elizabeth?
I do.
And then Commissioner Ikezi will abstain. Can you go ahead and read, call the votes?
Chair Biagini,
Yes.
Commissioner Chair Kuru,
Yes.
Commissioner Hero,
Yes.
Commissioner Wang,
Yes.
Commissioner
Yes.
Salame,
Sure, yes.
Commissioner Bhatnagar.
Yes.
Thank you. And the motion passes.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So we move to public presentations. Elizabeth, are there any members of the public that would like to briefly address the commission on any item that is not on tonight's agenda?
We do not have any requests.
Thank you.
I'd like to raise an issue that I encountered as a resident of the city, not as a member of the planning commission, but as a member of the public, as a resident.
Huh?
Yeah. I've been having an easement issue with Xfinity. Xfinity came to my backyard many years ago, and I allowed them to come in because they do have easement, and I don't have Xfinity service, but Xfinity workers wanted to come in. They came in and they worked on their own line, and at the same time they disconnected my AT&T internet access by mistake. And this was many years ago. I tried to complain about it to Xfinity, and the supervisor in charge of all the workers, he made fun of me when I finally got hold of him after 1 week, saying, "Oh, well, this happens to you because you don't have Comcast. Why don't you switch over to Comcast and give up AT&T?" And for 2 weeks, I went through phone customer service hell to get this fixed. So last week, Xfinity workers came back and they wanted to access my backyard, and I said no. And the Xfinity worker threatened to cut off my AT&T line. He threatened to climb into my backyard from somebody else's, my neighbor's yard, and cut off my AT&T line. And on top of that, they called the police 3 times on me after I refused to let them in after I received that threat. I filed a complaint with Xfinity and the Santa Clara police because they were very aggressive in trying to force me to provide access. So this whole incident made me look into the easement issue, which affects a lot of people who have single family homes. Apparently, companies like Xfinity and AT&T have access to our backyards because the city has an agreement with each of these companies. And I even looked at the contract. It's a 25-page contract between the city and and the Comcast. And it has no provisions on escalation for when something like this happens. It was a serious problem that I experienced. It's an easement issue, which the Planning Commission is involved in. I plan to pursue this matter with the Task Force on Equity and Diversity about how Xfinity used the police to come after me. And I also plan to pursue this with other avenues to push to modify the agreement between Xfinity and the city, because Xfinity is taking advantage of residents. They're abusing the residents and they're getting away with it. So I just wanted to let you know that these people threaten my business. I work from home like everybody else, and getting a threat of having my internet access cut off is, it's a threat to my business. So I just wanted to
Share that.
Thank you.
explain what I encountered.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Yuki. Thank you for bringing that to everyone's attention. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's go to public hearing. The public hearing items for tonight, there's only one, a study session, which is the overview of the draft zoning code. So staff, could you please proceed with your presentation?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So tonight we'll be talking about the zoning code update. And what we'll be doing is I'll give a very brief PowerPoint presentation about the structure of the updated zoning code and talk a little bit about how to use and review the zoning code. It'll be out for public review and comment in about a week. And we'll work through a bunch of potential theoretical questions with the proposed code. So I'll switch over to Adobe Acrobat and we'll look together at the zoning code as it sits now, or the updated draft zoning code that's going to be the public review draft in a week or two. So with that, the structure of the code is pretty straightforward. It has 8 articles. Most of the work that we do, or in the planning division that we do, is really centered around the zoning districts. So Article 2, which includes the zones and development standards, that's where the bulk of the regulatory stuff that the planning division works with is contained. Article 1, enactment, is really what the powers of the zoning code are, how interpretations are made, things like that, things that set the stage for the zoning code. Article 2 covers the zoning districts and development standards, including height, bulk, use of land. Article 3 includes site planning, which is things like parking, landscaping, fence heights, all of the sort of extra bits beyond the plain development standards in Article 2. Article 4 is what we call standards for specific land uses. So specific land uses like gas stations, farmers markets, things that need additional regulations associated with them. They each get their own section within Article 4. Article 5 is nonconformities. So for non-conforming uses, it explains how we deal with them. Non-conforming uses meaning uses or buildings that were established legally, but now for whatever reason are not up to current code standards. This is an important one, especially considering the fact that a number of our industrial properties were created or built under the light industrial zoning district and will now have new zoning designations associated with them. So this is something that we put a fair amount of time and effort into. Article 6 explains the processes associated with each type of development permit, including development review permits, conditional use permits, variances, and the like. Article 7 explains zoning code administration. So explains how rezonings are accomplished, but also talks about things like noticing and appeals. And finally, definitions is Article 8, which gives the ground rules for terms that we use within the zoning code and is actually a surprisingly important place when we're using the code. So one of the nice things that seems very small, but is great, and we'll see it when we look at the code together, is that all similar districts are contained within one chapter of the new code, where in the past, each district got its own separate chapter, and we'd have to flip around through the code to really understand what was going on. Uses are presented in a tabular format, which makes it easier to understand between districts the differences in intensity that would be expected in, say, commercial, in the CN neighborhood commercial district versus the CC community commercial. And relevant allowed uses are all found in one chapter. And just to compare it to the current code, in the current code, like I said, each individual zoning district gets its own chapter. And there's that 50-year-old code creates a sort of pyramid of uses that if you're in the CT zoning district, there are allowed uses there, but they're also, the CT zoning district also allows all of the uses in the CC community commercial district and also the CN and OG zoning districts. So, really to understand one district, CT, you have to look in 4 places. And this new code will, in its organization will be a real improvement over the current situation. So ingredients of a zoning code, like I said, one thing that we rely on are definitions to explain what a short-term rental is, for instance. There's no clear definition outside of the zoning code. So that's something that we define in our definition section. Intent statements are useful within the zoning code. They explain what the purpose of each individual district is. And they give, if somebody's looking for a place for a particular use, they help direct people in that way. Allowed and conditional uses are the ways that we regulate or prohibited uses, uses within a particular zoning district. The development standards, again, height, bulk, use of land, setbacks, things like required landscaping. These are things that, are the regulatory elements of the zoning code. The zoning code also calls out who the decision makers are and what the permit processes are for each of the potential uses, and gives non-conforming uses clear treatment, and also talks about expirations of permits and revocations. So when you all will have the opportunity to review and comment on the zoning code. What we'll do is we'll have a PDF available online that you can comment directly into using commenting software. So hoping to hear or hoping to see a lot of comments from all of the commissioners, even if they're technical questions. Just, it will help us make the zoning code better. So really hoping to see your participation in all of this. So the things that occurred to me while I was thinking, like, what should commissioners be looking at or thinking about? Intent statements are useful, and do intent statements describe what we want out of a district? When you're thinking about uses that happen along Stevens Creek Boulevard, do uses of the community commercial seem, or regional commercial seem reasonable? And does the intent statement describe that? If you have a particular use in mind, is the use enumerated? Meaning, is it there as a clear separate category? Are there uses that need to be added? And this is something like, especially coming from a 50-year-old code, I think there are always going to be places where we could potentially add new uses and give them and put them in particular places. What we do now, if we don't have enumerated uses, we make interpretations and find the closest use possible. But there might be reasons to differentiate and create new enumerated uses. Is the use defined? There are times where, I think that there's a general idea of a particular use, auto sales, that doesn't necessarily need a definition, but if you think a definition might be helpful, that could be something that we should be adding. Are the development standards clear? I think this should be relatively straightforward, but you'll see there might be a case or two where they're not. And if you're reading through it and it doesn't make sense to you, if a development standard doesn't make sense to you, these should be regulatory and clear, pointed out. So given a project's location, can you determine what the permit process is? And one thing that you should be looking at is, for discretionary permits, just checking in on what the required findings are. There are places where we'll encounter one with the first question that I have, where there are additional required findings beyond what we normally require. And are there any exceptions to the development standards? Are there any places like particular improvements that do not have to meet setbacks? One thing that I can think of off the top of my head are front porches, for instance, and we have a clear exception to that development standard. So as you're reviewing the zoning code, sort of keep these kinds of questions in mind. And with that, I'm going to just take a second to field questions, and then we'll start working with the zoning code itself.
I'm looking at the list. Well, I have a question, so let me ask that. John, how do you determine what similar districts are encompassed in one place? How's that determination made?
Okay,
The
so yeah.
definition is similar,
Okay, and that's something that by using the zoning code, we'll see. So
Okay.
it's commercial, industrial, residential districts, and now we also have a section for mixed use districts. So it's really the broad category of use.
Okay.
All of the industrial districts are contained within one chapter of the zoning code.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I don't see, yes, I do see one hand, Commissioner Cherakuru.
I apologize if you hear any background sounds, so let me know. But John, we have climate action plan, we have sustainability goals,
Right.
and we have other, progressive trackers, traffic lights and whatnot. How do they dovetail when we are imposing a zoning code? Does the zoning code already take into consideration some of our sustainability goals, like electric panels, water irrigation systems? How are those presented or understood by a reader of zoning code requirements?
The climate action plan is a parallel document, and we would use both in the review of development proposals. To the extent that the climate action plan has implementation actions that call for additional standards to be put in the zoning code, as the new climate action plans adopted, we will be looking at ways to update the zoning code to be more parallel to the climate action plan. If there are requirements for things like EV parking spaces, for instance, we'll be adding those standards to the zoning code.
So right now, we do not have in the zoning code the ratios for parking to be a certain percentage for EV.
I'd have to go back and look, but let's look together. I think we do, but it might not be to the level of the current climate action plan or to the
Gloria, this is Gloria, sorry. If I could
Go ahead,
just
Gloria.
offer, if I could just offer this as well, that the EV standards are usually in the building code. And so what happens is when that committee gets together and adopts and improves the building code every so often, they are progressively increasing that ratio. And so the zoning code is only going to be adopted once every so often. So we look to like different codes for those updates rather than having to update the zoning code. We would defer to, like, say, Cal Green or something of that nature for the ratio, unless we're going to start with, say, a percentage 10% above Cal Green, something of that nature. But because that fluctuates, we typically wouldn't put the ratio of something like that in the zoning code. So we would rely on the building code itself for that reference.
So I'm not familiar if CBC code goes so far as to, because parking is typically under zoning code.
Yes.
Parking is
the
not an
ratio
actual.
of the park, yeah, and like handicap parking, that kind of thing.
Yes,
But
so
it
all of
seems
that.
like the EV code, the EV code may be changing. We could put a ratio in there. Say if it's 6% above the state standard, something like that is a little easier than quantifying it because it's going to be changing pretty regularly. And so we don't want our code to be out of date or have to be amended on a more frequent basis. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and where I'm going is, yeah, under parking, we need to make that at least known that the zoning code
Yes.
will include the recommended implementation requirements of EV, but as I
Right.
know, CBC does not have a threshold as of now. Certain cities have adopted it as part of their zoning code itself
Correct.
under the
Yes.
parking. And my suggestion is that we go there, but always go with the assumption that if the CBC code ever comes to a point that is superior, we'll go with the superior alternative always. So just a suggestion
Yes.
that it be qualified in our zoning
Yes.
code.
Could I
Good
just,
suggestion. Thank
Could I
you.
just add one thing? Last night, the city council did completed the second reading of a REACH code. And that does require that 25% of parking spaces in all new multifamily projects of over 20 units have level 2 EV ready spaces. And then 75% of the parking space have to be what are called light level EV2, level 2 EV ready spaces. So we did actually just last night increase the EV parking requirements as part of the building code. I think your concern is well taken as well, Commissioner.
Yeah, so as a layperson and as a person who's helped many try to get their permit process through, when we are siloing the number of resources or requirements and an architect, a homeowner, a person who's just trying to get started in the business has to go and hunt these down, because inevitably what it comes down is you do not meet all these additional requirements. Where are they? Well,
Yes.
you had to have looked at the climate action plan. You have to look at the REACH
Right.
code. You had to have looked at the, so in a progressive way, we should make it
Yes,
all
definitely.
into one comprehensive resource document, whether it's zoning code parallel with general plan, not much, of a horizontal alignment, but at least on a, horizontally, all of the
Yes.
aspects should be connected. So I'm saying insert language into zoning code that points to these additional layers or changes potentially even that might happen.
Very, very good. Thank you. Yes, we do get complaints about things like that where people are looking for code development standards, and they do have to look in multiple places. So that would be very helpful. Thank you very much for that suggestion.
Thank you, Commissioner Cherakuru, for bringing up a pretty valid point that's helpful. Commissioner Ikezi, your hand is up.
Thank you, Chair. My question is about like new types of businesses that are being developed. Many of the businesses are changing because of the internet. For example, Tesla's dealer is very different from the traditional automotive car dealership. And another example is ghost kitchens, which I think might be treated as a restaurant, but they drive way more traffic than traditional restaurant. So how do we anticipate those types of how will we handle these new unanticipated forms of businesses in our code?
Yeah, and some of this might just have to be when a new use like a ghost kitchen comes into being. It might have there might be additional impacts from it, like you're saying, because of additional traffic or the need for additional parking. So we might have to create a new enumerated use that includes new development standards, such as additional parking requirements, or where it might be located might only be in light industrial zoning districts where the amount of traffic is reasonable for the area. So yeah, it's something we will, typically, yeah, over the years, when new uses come into being, yeah, that's something that gets amended into the code.
So it will be handled on a business type by business type basis, but also on the planning commission, like the way
Often go ahead.
Oh, the way, similar to the way the short-term rentals were handled when, they popped up everywhere. We came up with a new ordinance, that kind of thing?
Correct.
Okay, understand. Thank you.
John,
Okay.
tearing off of what Yuki was mentioning, there's also the California Homemade Foods Act and then the cottage food law. So it's getting broader as time progresses. First, you could just make dry goods and small things of that nature. Now it's progressed into like meal preparation. So I think allowing that extent in the single family is something that we'll also have to recognize and accommodate as well.
Oh, wow. Okay, thank you.
Well,
You're
you spurred my memory, so I was looking that up.
Yeah, thank you.
So thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
for sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions from the commissioners? I know Yuki, your hand is still up, but I'm assuming you just haven't lowered it. Okay.
Thank you.
If there's no other questions, then we'll move to the public. Elizabeth, are there any public speakers?
No, we
Well-
do not have any public speakers.
Chair Biagini, what I'd like to do is open up the zoning code and run through a.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
That's okay.
All right.
Run
Yes,
through a couple.
please.
Sure. So we'll work through a couple of theoretical scenarios that we here at the planning division we're talking about over the last few days. So typical things that planners see when we're at the counter dealing with the public and having to provide answers from what's in the zoning code. So first question, a restaurant owner comes into the counter or talks to us through Zoom and says that they'd like to have an outdoor dining area. They're in the community commercial zoning district and they want to have an outdoor dining area with 40 seats. Is this allowed? And what's the process? And so I'm just gonna sort of talk through this a little bit. So typically where we would look first, and I have bookmarks here for all of the articles, typically where we would look first is in the development standards and the zoning district. So, so we have the commercial zones, which includes community commercial. CD is downtown commercial. CN is neighborhood commercial and CR is regional commercial, which is the most intense. The kind of zoning or the kind of shopping centers that you see on the biggest corners of El Camino and Stevens Creek Boulevard. So what I'll do is I'll scroll down to this section and we'll see if it's allowed. So this article includes all of the types of zonings that we're passing by the residential zoning districts. So I'm just taking a quick look at the intent statement for community commercial. So a broad range of community serving uses. Encourage the development of commercial shopping centers that focus on community amenities, including grocery stores, restaurants, banks, professional offices, and gas stations. So, a broad district that can encompass a lot of different uses. So in the commercial zones, we actually have a separately enumerated use for outdoor dining and seating. And in the community commercial district, it's called out as a minor use permit. So it would require a hearing before the director of planning. And we can go to both. It also calls out additional regulations. we can go to the additional regulations for outdoor seating and see what that's all about, and then also talk a little bit about the process for a minor use permit. So outdoor seating is a specific land use that we call out in Article 4. And you can see under Code Section 18.60.140, outdoor dining and seating.
And John, I just wanted to say that when we actually get a code, like in our city code, we do actually have operable links so that people can click to the actual section. So it wouldn't take someone as long to scroll down.
Okay. Yeah, you can also use the find function. So I'll use that for the next thing. So purpose is to regulate outdoor dining and seating. The permit requirements. So outdoors dining and seating areas are allowed as follows. 24 or fewer seats, a zoning clearance is required, which basically is an over-the-counter permit. And more than 25 or more seats requires a minor use permit. And when it's required, director shall make the following standard findings for a minor use permit, as well as the following additional findings, which talk about continuous pedestrian path of travel, doesn't interfere with pedestrian traffic on the sidewalk, doesn't interfere the access of public employees or utility workers to do their jobs, and allows an unobstructed view of traffic devices. So there are also standards around location, hours of operation, what kinds of signs can be put up, and the maintenance that has to occur for these outdoor seating areas, and distance from residential uses. So especially for the uses where it's just a zoning clearance, it's just an administrative permit. It doesn't have any discretion involved. Things like this distance from residential uses, located less than 100 feet of a property line of a residentially zoned parcel if it doesn't require without prior approval of a minor use permit. However, minor use permit will not be required if it's located less than 100 feet, if it's a service window, or if they follow these operation restrictions, that they're completely separated from the zone property by a non-residential building, they don't operate after 10 p.m., and that the seats can be secured. So there are also operational standards, meaning how the permit holder has to operate the section, with regard to things like maintenance, how they clean up, how they deal with alcoholic beverages. And so the permit, or the permit, the zoning code language provides a fair amount of detail about required conditions and operation. So, and just going to minor use permits. Thing that's interesting about minor use permits is that for minor use permits, they reviewed and approved or denied by the director of planning. And if the director feels that there's, or the director can choose to refer it to the planning commission if they don't feel like they're adequately prepared to make that decision themselves, or that they want the input of the full commission. Notice and hearing, notices are required, but the thing that's interesting about a minor use permit is that if a hearing does not need to be or does not need to be held if the public does not ask for a hearing for minor use permits. So if it's a little bit different than the typical process for a conditional use permit now, where it's always heard by the Planning Commission, but the code in this case allows for the director to approve projects on a specific date that's contained within the notice. If nobody from the public who gets a notice, if nobody contacts the planning division and indicates that they want a hearing. So this is a streamlining measure to allow for the most typical types of minor use permits like outdoor seating to be something that's approved without a hearing. Any questions on that? Yes, Commissioner.
Sorry, I was on mute. Commissioner Cherukuru.
Thank you, Chair. Davidson, if you could go up, just scroll up to clarify what is a minor permit.
Minor use permit, again, if we look in the use table, it's anything that's called out as requiring a minor use permit. So when we looked in the use table in Article 2, it was called out as something that was, hold on. So you'll see in the use table, all of the uses either have a dot or a dash by them, meaning that the use is prohibited, a P meaning it's permitted, CUP meaning it's a conditional use permit, or new in this version of the code, we have the minor use permit. So in the neighborhood, yeah, and that would be subject to the process that I just described.
And the way a minor use permit would get to a public hearing would be?
That the planning division would review the project proposal, declare it complete, and notice it for hearing. So typically, the code requires at least a 300-foot notice, but we have our public outreach policy, which might require more.
And so if there are no public comments, no letter, then the director can go ahead and proceed with approval. If there is a request from a public to have a public hearing, that's what I was trying to clarify.
Yeah, then it's heard by the director of planning at a public hearing. So
I see. So a minor use permit is an administrative review. Period.
It's a discretionary review. But it just has that twist of not needing a hearing or only having a hearing if people are interested in having.
Did I just lose the sound?
Got it. So first step is if it is a minor use permit, discretionary review, go through the usual discretionary requirements, meeting zoning code, CEQA kicks in, and if it's all good, you can clear it to say it's approved. If there and you send a notice out, the application is complete, unless there's people objecting. If there are people requesting, then it's heard as a public hearing by the director.
Correct. Exactly.
And what's the next step?
Then the director issues an
appeal would be?
Approves it at the hearing. Yeah, and there's a 10-day appeal period.
And the appeal would be to?
Would be to the Planning Commission.
Okay.
That's a very good question. So yeah, that's something that's new responsibilities for the Planning Commission with this code. That you are the appeal body for the director.
So that's why I was trying to chase the bouncing ball to say where else do the changes need to go to clarify what are the escalations or appeal processes, and where at what points does it get public visibility, in fact. Okay.
And I think it's important to note that the Planning Commission is where the buck stops.
Yeah, there's
current code, we no longer have multiple appeals. So the Planning Commission decision is the final decision if it gets appealed. It does not get appealed again to the City Council. We no longer have multiple multiple levels of appeal. You get one appeal, and that's the planning commission.
That's interesting. That is interesting. Okay, and okay. So the
Minor use
last,
permits anyway.
I know, okay, I hope it's, and where I think I got a little lost and wound is in a person's ability to easily chase this down as to what qualifies as an MUP. So I don't know, John, if there's an actual glossary that says what is CR, what is CN, because I see the definitions are clickable, but it doesn't explicitly state that you are in CNCC. So it requires a little more of almost a theoretical review for any person, which is slightly more complicated for something simple. So just a thought to refine glossaries. What are the uses that come under minor use permit? What are major use permits? So somewhere that it's clear that, hey, if you're in this category, you're a minor use permit. If you're, because this is like going through.
No, true. And one of the things that, has to, or this is a document that has to get used with the zoning map. So you're exactly right that it's sort of a two-step process.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Cherukuru. And John, if I could ask you to repeat a bit, when Commissioner Cherukuru first asked the question, my computer blacked out. So I missed the first minute or two of what you said, and I think it was pretty important. So could you possibly repeat it? Not so much for me, but because of the importance of it.
Yeah. So again, this new permit process, the minor use permit, is something that's approved by the Director of Planning, has the same required findings as a conditional use permit that the Planning Commission will continue to weigh in on and approve. But the interesting twist with the minor use permit is that the Planning Division will send out notices for the project and will be indicating that if nobody objects, it will be approved on a certain date. And if the people receiving the notice, if anybody objects or wants to have a public hearing, they can reply to the Planning Division, and the Planning Division will set up a hearing before the Director of Planning. The additional sort of twist that Commissioner Cherukuru wanted to know about is that the appeal of a minor use permit is to the Planning Commission.
Much appreciated, John. Thank you. We have a hand up from Commissioner Harrow, and then again, Commissioner Cherukuru, which I will call on for a second time if no one else raises their hand after Commissioner Harrow. Commissioner Harrow, you're on.
Yeah, so I appreciate the definition of the minor use permit and what criteria that falls under. How about the conditional use permit, and at what point does that trigger the involvement of the Planning Commission?
So yeah, let's go back to the conditional use permit section. So conditional use permits, any of the uses that you see in the use table that require a conditional use permit will eventually end up in front, if they're complete and if they're ready for hearing, will end up in front of the Planning Commission.
Understood. So it takes a certain review by the director on the minor use permit before it, and it may or may not be contested by members of the general public, residents, before the Planning Commission sees the item. Is that correct?
Correct. So it would, in the case of a minor use permit, the way that it would get to the Planning Commission is only if after an approval or a denial by the director.
By the director. Gotcha.
Somebody appeals it, and then it goes to the Planning Commission.
But it seems that the conditional use permit, one way or another, is going to need approval by the Planning Commission.
Yeah, always.
Thank you.
There we go. Thank you, Commissioner Harrow. Commissioner Cherukuru, you have another question?
Just to follow up with what John had indicated, when there are no requests from the public, and I want to make sure that public is given in your notice ample time, Because usually a public hearing is word of mouth, and the date is where they have an ability to come and say. But in the case that is changing now, that if you do not respond back to the planning commission, we will go ahead and approve it by default almost, seems to need a little more soaking time with the public to come to that decision. So I want to make sure that in the zoning code or in the actual process, you have a clearly thought through time as to what is a good timeline for people, because this is not a typical hearing. A typical hearing was, I can get the notice 3 weeks in my mailbox, but because my neighbor told me the day of the hearing, I can show up to a public hearing.
Yeah, and let's take a look in Article 7, which includes noticing, and see if there's a specified timeline. And if there isn't, that's something that we should probably add as part of this review process. Especially
with the minor use permit, because it is going as almost literally, if nobody objects, it's considered approved. And most of the time, nobody has the attention and the media, the knowledge of its true impact, unless it gets, next door, it gets a little more momentum in the neighborhood. That's when a public hearing becomes really important. And so if some of these minor use permits, which I still haven't seen the full gamut of what comes under a minor use permit, may or may not be on that line, a threshold.
It will be lovely when the links are there, Rena.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, John, I think I saw 10 days, which was a trigger for me. If you go a little bit further down,
Yeah, I think I did too.
method of distribution.
Yeah, here.
So there we should distinguish though, right? Because in the minor
Exactly.
use permit,
Yeah,
right?
this says with a public hearing.
Exactly. So because it is not a public hearing as a default setting with the notice, then you need to just clarify that, on that in your zoning ordinance, that notification period for minor use permit is different from a notification for a conditional use permit.
Okay, no, that's good feedback.
All right. Okay, we have Commissioner Harrow. I have another question. Go ahead.
Yeah, along the same lines, is there a criteria for who gets notified? Is that on a minor use permit? Do we have that spelled out as well? Like, is there a quarter-mile radius? How is that spelled out?
Again, it's a 300-foot radius by law, but we also have additional requirements in our public outreach policy. So for bigger projects, we typically do either 500 or 1,000 feet in radius.
And that would be for more like a conditional use permit?
Right, so something like
live music venue, something like that.
Correct. So the public outreach policy provides a little bit more detail on how we differentiate those. But yeah, for something like just additional outdoor seating, I would think we would use 300 feet.
Understood. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Harrow. Any other questions of John? I don't see hands up right now.
John, you have a few of these scenarios, right?
Yeah, well, how about we do 2 more and see how it goes?
Sounds good.
This one's a little more straightforward. A homeowner in the old quad has an existing legal non-conforming 3-foot side yard setback and wants to make an addition to the rear. So typical development standard is for side yards is 5 feet. And
John, can you just explain what legal non-conforming is for everyone?
Yep. So legal non-conforming means a property that has been developed in a time when something like a 3-foot side yard was legal, but it is no longer legal. But since it was developed legally, we consider it what's called legal non-conforming. So legal, but also not conforming to the current ordinance. So does that make sense?
Definitely helpful.
So has a 3-foot side yard setback and wants to make an addition to the rear. Can the property owner continue using that setback, or do they have to propose at 5 feet? Are there any other development standards? And so I just wanted to show our non-conformities section, and especially in this case, non-conforming structures. So So allowed improvements and expansions of non-conforming structures. So residential expansions, this is a thing that we have been, getting inquiries on in the past. So residential expansions, so existing non-conforming side setbacks, 3 feet minimum. Existing non-conforming side setbacks of at least 3 feet are allowed to be extended to the rear of the dwelling for 1-story expansions. So when I was sort of calling out, are there any additional development standards? The additional development standard is that the height of the proposed expansion can only be 1 story. So important to note.
Okay.
So that was a straightforward one. So Commissioner Chair, yeah, I'll let you.
Yeah. Commissioner Cherukuru, go ahead.
You should know, John, that this is all I have done for, for my past life. So zoning code is. So one of the things that has come up when this has been implemented in others is that there has been a square footage limitation. And I was wondering if there was a reason why there was no square footage limitation, or if there was a rebuild/remodel criteria that would push a 3-foot extension. That would be one little wall that would be now a whole new house. And or if there are, what happens if it's, why not a 2nd story? So I'm gonna go there.
Yeah, so with this language, we would be using it for expansions that are to the rear of the existing dwelling. So would not involve the complete rebuild of a property the way you're, or at least I conceive, or I think you're describing it. The other thing is just as far as potential or square footages or some sort of square footage restriction, we still have coverage maximums that we have from the old code. So 40% coverage maximum in single family districts that has to be implemented also. So other development standards limit the amount of development that can happen on a property.
So I'm going to push back a little here, play the devil's advocate. When I read this, and again, you're going to push me if I come as an application, but existing non-conforming side setbacks of at least 3 feet. Okay, so there's a wall. It has up to the, I have a rear yard. I have potential to expand, but I could chop from here and go all the way. So I could start at what point is a rear yard when I choose to remodel from 60% of my house? The way it is written, at least for my interpretation, is I have to meet the rear setback.
Correct.
Extended to the rear of the dwelling for 1 story. So it's, if the 20 feet setback is from the rear, I could do 20 feet, but I could go all the way in.
Right, you'd still have to meet the rear setback of 20 feet, but you could extend to, or you would be able to extend back from the existing house.
All the way to the front.
Disagree.
That's what I'm asking. At what point do you say, sorry, this is more?
I think the words are allowed to be extended to the rear of the dwelling. So I'm going to defer to Xander a little bit, but I think that's clear enough.
So yeah, you're going to, it's an interpretation, right? You feel like the rear is defined very clearly, but what is a rear yard is very different from the rear of what a
Well,
person.
Or it's interesting just from a zoning perspective that the rear yard is different than the rear setback. The rear yard is defined as between the back wall of the existing house and the property line, where the setback is from the rear property line to 20 feet away from it. So we're talking about extending from the rear of the building.
So go along with the scenario that I just described. I'm a property owner. I have a house today. Okay, I have about 30 feet of my side yard in three feet. I have 20, but I'm going to start remodeling. And now that what was my 30 feet, I'm going to start my remodel from 10 feet of my front. Okay. I'm going to start taking that wall. I'm going to stop and I'm going to go all the way to the rear yard. You're saying, yes, it makes no issues because we would have allowed it as a legal non-conforming. Where I'm asking is, this is almost a new rebuild.
Okay.
So it's a new wall.
Okay, you're saying if the main house was reconstructed to be at 3 feet, it would no longer be legal non-conforming. Is that the question? Yeah.
At what point do you lose your legal non-conforming? Where I'm going with it is, what is the threshold? At which point you say you're no longer in the legal non-conforming status, you're now in a whole new home.
Right. So yeah, the typically we have a threshold for at least destroyed non-conforming structures is 75%. And
that's reconstruction. That's the one I'm looking for, reconstruction.
But it's always involuntary damage. If you take down the existing house, you have to build it 5 feet. I mean, if it's voluntary. So yeah, that's a good differentiation that if you remove the legal non-conforming part of the house, you've lost your legal non-conforming status. So that's a very good thing to point out.
Yeah.
John, so
only because I know that.
Along that same line, because I know that's the discussion we've been having about architectural review too, is that what if someone were to remove all the cladding and take it down to the studs, but still they basically are taking advantage of the fact that they have a 3-foot setback, but they're going to rebuild the whole thing, but they leave the walls. And that's what we dealt with also. Yeah. And so would that be permitted to they remove all the cladding and down to the studs, but they retain the wall, then they can rebuild it in the same place and expand it at 3 feet?
Or people come with just foundation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to understand how people can read through, and Xander probably is more of an expert on legal loopholes. Yeah. And when you, and I've dealt with all of it, which brings a heightened sense. Rebuild versus remodel has to have thresholds.
Right.
And it's simpler when you put explicit thresholds, 500 square feet, 200 square feet, 1,000 square feet, 50% or more of your exterior walls. Yeah, then it's got a clear, you don't have to read between the lines. You don't have to find loopholes out of it.
Right.
Interesting.
And we have made some revisions like to the architectural. I think we described now that if you remove 50% of the walls, basically down to the studs, we consider that a major demolition because the neighbors got upset about hearing the description that was posted on site and then what they saw. And so we actually had to issue stop work order, go back to development review hearing and clarify that we called it a demolition. So it was at least accurately described. So
this was in the old
to say something that if you remove more than 50% of the cladding, then you've lost that choice. But a lot of times when someone's adding on and tying into the structure, they're going to have to remove that cladding because they have to upgrade the entire structure in order to meet code. You can't just do half of a continuous wall. So there may be a lot of instances where it'll look like it's not conforming to this. So we need to have, like you said, some better descriptions that we can identify in what case can you utilize the non-conforming provision.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to, sorry, go ahead, John.
No, I was just going to follow on and say, and when do you lose the non-conforming provision?
Yes.
Right, we need something to.
And especially when it comes to the historic properties, which is a real issue. Many of them, have foundational issues. So when even though there is no real interest to, bypass, when you go in there, you're going to encounter real need to replace. So your permit process might have said on paper, great, but of course the contractor is going to go there, which is, I'm not speaking theory, I'm speaking of an actual case that was within the city of Santa Clara, where they had to remove all of it because of the damage that the wall had been. And of course, all permits, all drawings are in place. Then what? Do we make them say, no, you go to 5 feet now? It's a historic house. All of the properties are all of 25 feet wide.
Yeah.
So you have to have exceptions, yes.
Right, and we do have a lot of foundation replacements because of the type of soil that's in the old quad. So there's a lot of foundation replacements, but we still, that's one thing we would want to allow that old setback for those instances, definitely.
Yeah, so again, playing the devil's advocate, so you have 3 feet. The house next door has 2 feet, 2 stories, legal non-conforming. Why would the house adjacent be limited on the 2nd story?
I think that the main thing is that we're trying to create a process this is non-discretionary. If there was a 2-story house that was at 2 feet setback, we should be looking for a process where I would think that the city would want additional discretion in a case like this. This process is purely administrative.
Okay, so then it's helpful to clarify, yes, you can choose to add 3 feet up to 2nd story. You just have to go through a review process that potentially is a public hearing process.
Correct.
So what we don't want to is to remove that option, because in all reality, with all of the expansion enabling, for housing, it seems arbitrary in my mind. If you're trying to make it legal, there's 3 feet requirement from a fire safety regulation standpoint, so be it. Otherwise, the house next door, I live in, 3 feet, 2-story, legal non-conforming. But if I want to come and now I have to go through a more arduous or possibly impossible option, is something that we don't want to have.
Okay, and so for something like this, it sounds like you would be interested in a process where it's a conditional use permit or a minor
use permit, yeah.
Where the findings are health, safety, and welfare and not.
Exactly.
Good.
Thank you, Commissioner Terakuru. I think what all of this in my mind points to is the entire complexity of reviewing and new zoning codes and the like. It's a humongous job that you've done on staff. And I think Commissioner Terakuru, having a little bit of past experience with planning, your questions bring up some really good points to make for a stronger draft code. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Chair. And again, the staff, I think this is incredible. 50 years to change is a huge accomplishment. I mean, it's like almost to the point of biblical times that we have to come forward to. So a huge kudos to all of the Santa Clara City team that's put this together. So my feedback is going to be purely on the semblance of how public have reacted in the past to these zoning codes and some of the ability to make it easier. If the zoning code is truly progressive, it should be a friend to the resident as well as the city. So that's where I'm going with all my feedback and questions. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Cherukuru. Actually, I was thinking not huge. I was thinking humongous. It's a bigger word for this hugely complex job, but I too thank staff. Any other commissioners with questions? Okay, John, I don't know if there was more you wanted to go through.
Rena, do you want to go through one more, or what do you think?
Sorry, I'm unmuting myself. I think it's fun. Let's do it again.
If I may,
You might have a different
it's all right,
conception
it's
of
all-
fun
this
than
is-
everybody else.
No, I know if I were you, John, it would not be fun. I know, but I think it's good because, you know, so John's going to talk about this, right? We can't go through this whole document with everyone. That is just not feasible. But the Planning Commission is going to be given a homework assignment to actually review this document and give edits to it and comments. You know, it's going to be available as it is for the general public. So we can't possibly go through every page, but we want to acquaint you with how people typically use this document so that you can do some wayfinding on your own. So, you know, I don't think this next exercise is to illustrate another example, but rather help think through, like, how do you go through this document and be resourceful, you know, as you would as a planning commissioner. And many of you have worn different hats. So I think that's why, you know, we're going through this exercise. So John, I personally think it would be helpful to do one more.
Okay, well, since it's sort of a topic of the moment, let's do one that a homeowner spends half the year out of the country and wants to rent their home out as a short-term rental for terms of 30 days or less. What are the city's regulations around short-term rentals? And so going to the document, one of the things that usually we would look for things like uses within Article 2. But the thing with short-term rentals is that it's not a use in and of itself. It's a form of tenure. And I know that that's a little bit of a very fine-grained differentiation. But here, for instance, when we're talking about residential uses, we talk about whether they're multifamily or single family, which is the use itself, but we don't say it's rental or it's ownership. That's tenure. So the place where short-term rentals goes is into our specific land uses. So we have a separate section for short-term rentals. And let me just. The other thing is that we have a definition for short-term rentals, which defines it as rentals for 30 days or less, and that's in Article 8. So definitions are always a good place to start if you're unsure of what the definition of the term is that you're grappling with. So operating standards, it can only be within a legal dwelling. So if there was an illegal addition made to the property, it would not be eligible to be used as a short-term rental. We have an annual limit. So for what are called unhosted rentals. So when a host is not present, the dwelling unit may be occupied as a short-term rental no more than 90 days in the calendar year. So in the scenario that we just talked about, they could only rent it out for 90 of the 180 days that the host is not present. So, but if the host was present, it's unlimited. So unlimited number of days. But knowing that even unhosted, you have to have a person who can be available and respond to complaints 24 hours a day. So, and respond within 60 minutes. So that's an important condition as far as the short-term rental part of the ordinance. So also restrictions around parking, trash and recycling, and big special events, which are prohibited on the property during short-term rentals. So the other thing is that we also have a registration requirement, and we also set occupancy limits. So within a dwelling unit, it could be, it's 2 per bedroom. So if you had a 4-bedroom house or greater, it could be up to 8 people, but there is an occupancy limit, which is, yeah, a part of the code.
And John, I did want to just distinguish that we are able to be very clear in limiting number of people for short-term rentals because they're not considered housing. We have different standards where we have to meet fair housing law, which kind of guides different parts of this code. But I just want to distinguish here for short-term rentals, we actually can limit number of people.
Yeah, and for typical, for dwelling units generally, in the sort of traditional sense of the word, there isn't in the zoning code a limit on occupancy. It's really handled through the building code. So property owners who are using their house for short-term rentals also have to register with a city and renew on a yearly basis. So that can also be revoked if the property owner is not meeting the standards of the short-term rental part of the ordinance. And that includes payment of TOT, transient occupancy tax.
Okay.
So
We have Commissioner Terakuru has a question.
You're gonna hear me a lot.
I'm starting to realize the type of student you were, Commissioner Chair.
Should have known all along. Yes, there's my professor. He knows too. See how well I got trained? So one suggestion, why if people generally have to start with definitions, why is it in Article 8 and not Article 2 right after enactment or even 1?
And some zoning codes do that, and that's something that we could consider as part of what we bring forward to the council for adoption. So that's a good comment.
Okay, and I'm going to just bring awareness and probably, did you know there's an app to rent swimming pools?
What? You kidding?
That is interesting. That's a
So Airbnb
Wow.
is old.
Yeah.
Lord.
Airbnb is also asking people to rent their garages, and I've even seen driveways for rent. So that's another thing. I wasn't aware of the swimming pools. That's very interesting.
The unanticipated future.
Oh, very much live, thriving business, just FYI.
Right, monetizing your home. So
Yeah, which is, something that will
trend.
come up.
yeah.
So just a thought that it's not limited to homes.
Yeah.
Mm.
Wow.
Okay, giving
All
that
right.
preview. I'll keep quiet because I have the right to remain silent after this. But think it through in what all are coming as future state. And I know we can't anticipate all uses, but put in a caveat as to anything rentable will have to abide by certain requirements, including volumes. So people are monetizing probably every aspect that they can think of. And when it comes to land use, a home, retail, commercial, home being the closest to most people, is very much a thriving market. So just one thought. And I was going with the second, probably later question is, where can I see data centers as a use?
Yeah, let's go to the Article 2. But just regarding your comment about rental of everything, I think that that's something that, you know, might have a place in the home occupation section of the code, where, you know, if people are working at home, using their home for something, that might be a place where we start talking about, you know, how the home itself gets used.
Well, think about not a home occupation, but a pool being rented.
Property.
It's not under home occupation. Nobody is in the occupation, so they won't even come to you with a home occupation ask.
Yeah, true.
It's a property use, not really a home use. Got it. We have Commissioner Hero with his hand up when you're done, Priya. Are you ready to yield back for now? Okay, Commissioner Hero. Thank you, Priya.
I'd like to direct the question to Gloria about short-term rental of somebody's driveway. Now, that I don't think that the intent there is for occupancy. I think that people are renting driveways and garages for more like RV storage or vehicle
Yes.
storage.
Correct.
Would that come into play also under the code?
Yeah, that's a question for John. The other thing, if you've seen Commissioner Harrow, are those little mobile, they're like a home on wheels, and I think they call them like, John, what do they refer to those as?
Oh, the mini home.
Mini
The
home.
sprinter vans.
Oh, yeah.
Or the
It
houses
looks like
on
a
wheels.
little, it looks like an ADU, but it's on wheels. And
Right.
so
As I
there's,
understand.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No,
Okay,
so I
so
think,
that would be.
I don't think we've
Okay,
gotten
one
there
at a
yet,
time.
but primarily, yes, the reference I was making is that folks are, or I've seen the request for, as well as people advertise like to park, like you said, RV storage, or even someone, if they're living in a camper, there's been a request. Now, whether or not that's anything formal or available, I don't know yet, but I have seen those requests on social media. Looking for places to park, yeah, and private driveways, correct.
Thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I think they're generally referred to as tiny homes, but that's what you're
Yes.
talking about.
There you
Okay.
go.
I think the city of San Jose has a rule about them already.
Yeah, I think they do.
Yeah.
Okay, any other hands up for questions? Then John, I'm going to turn back to you. Oh, Commissioner Bhatnagar. Yes, you're recognized.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think this is an excellent point that Commissioner Cherukuru brought home. The codes that we are writing are probably trying to handle all of the experience we've had in the past and trying to move forward with issues that have resulted from previous codes and handling of those in the past. But it's very important to look forward as well, right? So things that are coming. Clearly, you don't want to have things go obsolete in this age of really fast change before the ink is dry. So in that regard, some thought came to me. In our neighborhood, there are a lot of people who have, well, when I say a lot, I mean quite a number of people who have RVs in their private lots, right? So they are parked properly and owned by a number of people. What governs those RVs to be used just like the swimming pool or just like a rental unit? One could advertise, people to use, if I had an RV, I could use that to be used as a rental property. One of those things to think about.
Currently under our code, so essentially the RV would be located in an R1 or single family district, or it could be a multifamily but has a single family house. So under the permitted uses, it's governed by the zoning code. It's not considered a habitable space, so it wouldn't be permitted. It would be subject to code enforcement. So you can't do that currently. So unless we change the code that would allow it, it would still be prohibited.
Yeah, my understanding is that they're governed by the vehicle code and not by the. not an improvement on a piece of property.
Yeah.
So
Way
that, okay, so that brings up one other question, which I'm going to yield after this, some things to think about. So one, where is that code? Presumably you're saying that it is, there is a code somewhere that guides the use, meaning you cannot rent it. But then the question about enforcement, right? So in the case that John was describing, where an owner is out for 180 days, there is this new law that will allow them to rent their place out for 90 days. And again, so now how do we control the 91st day, right? Are we depending on the neighbors who've been informed to tell, or are we looking at taxes that the person is paying? Just asking. Thank you. I yield, Chair.
Yeah, Commissioner Bhaktagar, that's a good question. That's actually something we're weighing still. And right now, what we're proposing are regulations, but we want to be really clear to the commission as well as to the council that to do any sort of proactive enforcement is going to take more resources from the city. So, you know, this is something that needs to come alongside with an enforcement program, and we are working to develop one to propose something for thought for the council. That would need to be funded. There are third-party, I should say, companies that have gotten into the business of short-term rental kind of administration and enforcement issues, but it would certainly involve more resources from our code enforcement. And that kind of tracking is another level of complication, right? So we've talked internally about, you know, our community in these particular regulations that you're reading about, you know, where does the 90 days come from? Why are we proposing what we're proposing is actually community feedback. We had sessions with where we invited the entire city to come and give us feedback specifically on short-term rentals. And the people who came were the ones who were most affected by bad actors because they were having problems and they wanted to see regulations in place. And what they provided feedback on is still this interest in wanting to have a short-term rental opportunity themselves. Like, obviously, if you regulate out, like, hey, no one can do short-term rentals, then that affects you too, right? So I think people want to balance the opportunity for short-term rentals on properties that are good actors, but we do know that we've had enough problems with short-term rentals that when we get into the business of enforcement, we're going to want an enforcement program alongside. So that's something that we're going to be proposing, but we don't have it all fleshed out and will require additional funding.
Thank you, Rena. And we have Commissioner Cherakuru.
This is probably not related to zoning. I'm out of curiosity, I'm asking, with the undergrounding of utilities, is there an actual code requirement that new construction should underground? I'm trying to understand how we still have all these overhanging poles and all the electrical still coming off of, when almost universally everybody has gone underground from electrical.
So Priya, yes, there are development standards and the utilities are really governed by Department of Public Works. They're kind of under that umbrella. And so there actually was something adopted by council several years ago, and it's been updated a couple of times. And so they have a threshold that says if you improve over $200,000, this is for non-residential, just like non-single family, let's say, over $200,000 within a 3-year period. So anything like commercial, offices, industrial, you have to underground and all the utilities. So now, in terms of whether or not that's feasible, there were a couple things how the city proceeded. I think there's less inclination towards this, but sometimes when there's only, you're a single, or maybe there's 1 or 2 users that are underground on a block, and maybe all of them are, a lot of the other properties are older, they used to get covenants on the property, and then the time that 50% or more of the properties on that block have received development approvals or have improvements over the 200,000, then they have the undergrounding is done all at once. They call for those covenants to be implemented. And sometimes we pull conduit, actually install conduit as part of the project approvals. So then the utilities could be pulled through those conduits. And so there is that threshold, but in single family, you're not going to see that as much because there really isn't anything that would really be, more likely a municipal program or a bonded improvement program, something like that. So that's how they get undergrounded. So unless we took more steps to factor that in the future for safety purposes, then otherwise you would still see those overhead service lines. And there's a lot of connectivity issues as well with that of when it can be done.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. And yeah, I have like an easement too. So I was curious how the city was progressing towards its underground, at least in the large. And to clarify again, some of the large scale projects which go under a development agreement, the zoning code kind of takes its different approach, right? So it's important, at least for us to recognize that some of the more massive projects, the more massive housing developments that are coming through are not going to be subject to these. Because you're going under a different development agreement, all in its own world and its entirety, and it's
yes, all of those are conditioned to generally underground all the utilities.
Yes, thank you, Gloria.
Yes.
In going back into the zoning ordinance requirements, and I'm going with the trail of thought, like the underground utilities, I'm hoping are implemented at least in the large scale, massive projects, housing developments, etc. And then on that vein, I realized, well, the zoning code would not apply to the 1,680 homes that a massive development is coming up with. It's primarily for the homes that are already built. The newer, the suburban, the massive developments are all, I don't know, are we going to require this zoning code changes, MUPs, and,
Yeah, to answer your question, Priya, Tasman East was developed under a standard zoning district that's contained within the zoning code. So not subject to a plan development zoning, not subject to development agreement. So 4,500 units in the Tasman East area. So we're expecting most all new developments to be subject to the zoning code.
That's good to know, because I was thinking they come under the other covenants or coverage on the development agreement itself, saying, hey, these are all homes that are already approved under a DA. We don't need to come for,
right.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Sure.
I yield, Chair.
Hey, thank you, Commissioner Cherukuru. We have Commissioner Salame.
Finally have a question. What I kind of looked through some of this, and the one thing I was missing is there any mechanism in place for applicants to get their permits adjusted if their land use adjusts during the lifetime of a project? Like if you're going to build a commercial and suddenly, before you break ground, it switches over to being mixed use or homes over commercial. Do the permits change, and they adjust the money and everything else, or does it remain under the initial permit? Did that make sense?
It does make sense. And I think that we would look under permit processing and see if they're so here under permit implementation, we have rules for changes to an approved project, and that's the code section that we'd be looking at. So
But does it get re-reviewed if the use changes during the life of the project? It hasn't, let's say, it hasn't been built yet, obviously, and you come through. Well, what's a better example? I can't think of one that's come up recently, but it's like a hotel becomes a hotel over commercial. It's a different project with a different land use. But
so of course we have our entitlements that are granted. And so other than this section that John's showing you, essentially that there's kind of one entitlement per project. If it changes significantly enough,
Yeah.
then there's a lot of repercussions. There could be additional changes to the fire code for the units that apply. And so it would have to go back through the process, generally through our project clearance committee. If they're minor in nature, sometimes people, we just went through a situation where they had to change the window sizes because of the equipment that would be needed to actually to clean them. And so, and the access from the height of the building. So there were those kinds, sometimes we treat them as minor changes, minor amendments to plans, and we've done that in the specific plan areas. Others we take back through the hearing process. And so it usually depends on the extent of the changes involved. But generally a land use has different codes applied, so the conditions of approval may not be applicable. There may be accompanying environmental review that has to be adjusted as well to reflect the new project changes.
Okay. So I guess I was struggling to come up with a good example to ask the question. It's an absurd situation, but see if we can follow. It's like somebody's approved for a 4-unit complex on a single, on a family, God, I can't even pose the words, a 4-unit complex where single family residents are normally built, and then comes back and decides, no, I only want to do a single family home. Do they get any? I'm sure that the permit for a 4-unit development would be more than a single family home. Would they ever see a refund, or vice versa? If they go from single to 4, do they incrementally increase their permit?
We only do refunds if we have not completed the process, because that accounts for the staff time. So in the event that we have had people change the project midstream, and so we either have to reactivate and charge them a partial fee, or we do refund projects in the middle if someone wants to withdraw.
Okay.
So, but if we have gone through the public hearing process, written the staff reports and have processed it through all the different departments, then the fee is capturing all the staff time.
Right. So it really boils down to the developer should plow ahead at all costs. So they're going to wind up going back to square one and starting over with permitting and everything else, right? Yeah.
To some degree, yes.
But
There are some cases, yeah, where we can adjust it, but if it's significant enough a change for the disclosure purposes of the Brown Act, everything of public participation and transparency, then we may be going back through the process again, but it could be more expedited because we've already looked at it.
I know that was a long one, but that was my first question. I have a second question, which is going to probably pull Xander in later. How does the permitting process work now with the ability to, AB 9 and 10, you split a lot and suddenly you've been permitted to build a home, but then you say, I want to build now 2 lots, 2 homes. Does each one have to go through a permit process, but it's a single owner, so they only have to do it once? And then the ADUs get added automatically. This is my classic 1 to 4 example that everybody should be familiar with now. You start with 1 lot, split it, put a home on each and build an ADU for each. So you got 4 units on 1 lot. What level does the permitting happen for that?
And I know you mean SB 9 and 10.
SB 9, yes. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Xander, is that a question?
Well, actually, that's a very easy question, because your question was what happens now? And the answer is because the law doesn't go into effect until January 1st.
Okay. The way back forward.
But assuming you meant what happens effective January 1st.
Exactly.
You're continuing to be worried about the cascading construction projects where it starts out as one thing and gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
So for a lot split under SB 9, if you're going to divide a property in half, the ADU law does not apply. You cannot split a lot and then add an ADU if you use that new SB 9 lot split ministerial procedure.
Interesting.
So ADUs are off the table after you split the lot. You are also prohibited from doing multiple splits under that law. So I remember from I think it was 6th grade math. I think it's called Zeno's paradox, where you have a box and you divide it in half, and then you divide the new box in half and the new box in half,
Yeah, how many boxes?
and into infinity. That doesn't work. Once you've done an SB9 division, you're done. The new owners are done. We'll have a record of it. Nobody can use that same process to continually subdivide the property. They'd have to go through a traditional subdivision process to do that. So you're never going to have a problem of multiple lot splits.
Right. That's good to know, because I could imagine a 10,000 square foot lot split twice and still be above the 1,200 square foot limit for the
Yes.
resulting lots. You could divide down multiple times in theory.
If you had a large lot and you got very creative and were willing to wait, you might be able to squeeze 5 units in.
Wow.
Assuming it's a very large lot, if there was a way to build 2 units on just half of that lot, there's no lot split yet. So the ADU law still applies.
Oh.
You could build an ADU in that circumstance. So now you have 3 houses. You have the 2 main houses and an ADU. Then you split it. Then you can put 2 houses on the other lot. You can't put an ADU on the second lot because
Got
you
it.
can't split at that point.
Wow.
I read the law is you've got a maximum of 5, but you'd have to do it in 2 steps. First, you scrape your lot, or if you have a big enough lot, you just build your second house. Then you add an ADU. Then you split the lot. Then you put in 2 more houses. That's the maximum I see under the law. And I believe that's a defect in the law. They meant to say ADU law doesn't apply whether you're doing a lot split, or if there's a lot split, you don't do ADUs. And if you're putting in 2 houses on a single family lot, you don't do ADUs. That's what they meant to say. But the way it's worded, it only applies, that limitation only applies when there's a lot split.
It's a total Rubik's Cube of figuring out how to do the process. But yeah, I see your point. Okay, so that really boils back to the original question. Does each part of this process that they're going through constitute a new permit, a new development process? Or is it, because of it all being done in consecutive order, one big permit to do multiple steps? Would we ever vote on it, is what I'm saying.
I'm not sure how planning would process that.
Yeah.
I think the circumstance I described, the multiple steps, would require multiple permits. But
Got it.
ultimately, we're talking building permits because it's going to be ministerial. There's no planning entitlements at this point.
So we'll never see it.
They'll see it, but they'll just have to say, yeah, it's approved. Go get your building permit.
Wow.
I hope the public did hear Xander's free consulting services on how to.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Well,
growing the
we don't
valley.
need any, well, it's okay. Somebody would have thought of it anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks, Sander. Okay.
Okay, I'm done. Thank you. I think I've mixed that pot enough. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Salem. Now we have Commissioner Bhatnagar, followed by Commissioner Ikezi.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Really a quick, not a question, a quick suggestion. And of course, I want to recognize and offer my thanks to the great monumental work that John and team in the building department have done in bringing these, fairly complex documents and rules up to date. The suggestion just follows the points raised by Commissioner Cherukuru and the ideas about, for example, swimming pools or garage spaces that could be rented out in the future. So in that same vein, maybe John, if possible, please consider adding a section here where these other documents or laws that apply to such cases might be included in here for completeness. So if somebody's looking to rent their RV, this document says, go look there, and then they find that they cannot do it, or whatever that is, right? So it's so that's the suggestion. Please consider it. I yield. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Any responses or comments, or we'll move to Commissioner Ikezi?
Yeah, well, something like that, a cross-reference document could be really useful at the planning counter, just to help people orient themselves to all of the things that they'd have to be cognizant of and comply with. So yeah, that's a good suggestion.
Terrific. Thank you, Commissioner Bhatnagar. Commissioner Ikezi.
Thank you, Chair. Since Commissioner Salem brought up the issue of SB9, I have been listening to the study sessions held by San Jose and Cupertino, and they're all saying that they're going to pass urgency ordinance before the new laws go into effect on January 1. Does Santa Clara plan to do something similar? And in the San Jose study session, the planner who presented said that since the ADU law is on the San Jose has a zoning law on the ADU specific or ADU specifically, and you know it's not just the state law that applies to San Jose. The AD, the combination of lot split, second unit plus ADU might be allowed, but it's all going to depend on the urgency ordinance. So I guess I'm interested in hearing what we're going to be doing.
Is that, I'm not sure that maybe one of the staff can answer that, but I'm
Yeah,
wondering if
it's,
that's a little premature, because that would assume we know what's in their minds about. It's a good
Yeah.
question, but is this
And
the right
just
place to
caution,
ask it?
right, I would just say it's not on the agenda, so let's just, just get some guidance or for information, but not dissect it because we're only on the zoning code issues. Unless John, you
Yeah,
have some
I
insight.
would just say that I personally am on calls probably weekly with different planners in the South Bay as we're trying to understand SB9 and its applicability. And different cities have slightly different takes on this and also are starting from a different place with their existing codes and regulations. Santa Clara is not intending to bring an urgency ordinance forward because quite frankly, we were only given a couple months and we need a little bit more than a couple months to bring forward an ordinance that we think is going to stick. So our intention is to bring forward something in February and do our study session in December on December 6th. I think it's December 7th with the Planning Commission and the City Council. And really that means for a month, we have to do what the state tells us to do. And we don't have where there is discretion, where there is not very much discretion. Actually, the city will not have established that on January 1st. However, we are coming very shortly thereafter with changes like definitional changes and certain things like, we could limit, we have to allow a minimum of 800 square feet. We could establish a maximum, right? So those kind of areas where we have discretion, we can implement those. So here, the state signed that law, the governor signed that law the end of September, I think. Maybe it was beginning of October. So we've been really focused on trying to get our permanent changes. And, this will be something where we all learn from our experiences. So I'm sure this won't be the only time we try to address ordinance changes on this, but I do want you to be aware that when John puts up our draft zoning code, it is not going to include the changes that we will be making before the new zoning code is adopted related to SB9 and SB10. Those will be handled separately because we intend to bring those forward in advance of this major zoning code update.
Thank you very much, Irina.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yuki. Something to keep in mind in the future. So I think, well, I know we still have to go to the public. Yuki, did you have another question? I noticed your hand was still up. Wasn't sure. Okay. If there's no other questions at this point, I think it would be good to go to the public. Elizabeth, are there any public speakers?
No, we do not have any public speakers.
Then motion to close public hearing be appropriate?
It's a study session. Technically, that's not required. You can just move on.
Okay, thank you. And I just wanted to, one final comment, and this really is quick. I'm making an assumption, so I'd like to hear about this. Once we have had the opportunity, and I'm certainly looking forward to reading the entire draft online, that's our homework. But once we've completed our homework, I'm making an assumption here. We will come back to this on the Planning Commission. I'm sure we'll have further questions. Is my assumption correct?
It is a legal requirement that the Planning Commission make a recommendation on the zoning ordinance before it goes to council. So I'm confident you will have another bite at this apple.
That's kind of what I thought. Okay. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, and thank all my fellow commissioners. Commissioner Harrow has his hand up. You're on.
I have one more question. I guess it would be directed at John. When will this draft be available for us to review?
We're going to get it on the city's website by the end of the month, so November 30th.
Understood. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Thank you. And Commissioner Bhatnagar?
Yes, Chair. I had a completely different point of information. So if I can make that now, I'd like to go ahead.
Sure.
This is about my ability to participate in the December 8th meeting. And if there's a study session on the December 7th, I'm outside the country, so I will not be able to join. And may I request that I be allowed to be absent for those?
I think we can talk about that after.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bhatnagar. Then let's go ahead and move on. I don't see any other hands up, so we can move on to the next part of the agenda, which is reports of commission, board liaison, and committee. Do we have announcements or other items? Staff?
No.
Did I just go offline? No, I'm still online. Okay, sorry, I had unstable internet. You can hear me, right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
No announcements from staff.
Okay, then we can move to commissioner travel and training reports or requests to attend trainings. Any reports?
Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry. I see Commissioner Chirakuru's hand up.
And we could have probably addressed it in either the director's report or council updates. There was an email forwarded as a request for something about the homeless housing along. Am I recollecting correct that there was an email from somebody to Planning Commission? And I didn't know if we were tracking that as a project on some of the city county transaction where
yeah,
we were, yeah, go ahead.
I think that was the White Oaks Lane project, the home key. So I do have an update when we get to
Okay,
the.
okay. Thank you. That's good. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. So we're still on this, I guess, Commissioner travel training, request to attend trainings. No other comments. I don't see any other hands. Then we can move to Director of Community Development reports, starting with Planning Commission budget updates.
We just have it on there, but we only give you the budget update once a month, so we don't have anything additional to report on that.
Okay, thank you. How about upcoming agenda items?
We will have the 3700 Santa Tomas Expressway, I believe, the daycare center. That one will be returning to you in the next meeting. And so we did get additional reports and documentation from the applicant. So you'll see that updated information. That's for consideration of the daycare center over there at Thomas and Montague.
El Camino or Montague, yeah.
Yeah, Montague, Santa. Okay, so that'll come back.
Okay, thank you.
Maria, I just wanted the Planning Commission to be aware that on January 27th, I think it's that meeting, we intend to bring our Patrick Henry Drive specific plan. Sorry for the background noise. I have a very irritating phone. I don't know if you guys even heard it. Sorry. So we intend to bring the Patrick Henry Drive specific plan for recommendation of the Planning Commission to the City Council. So that would be the adoption hearing, recommendation hearing. We also will maybe be requesting a special hearing earlier in January. We do anticipate that Patrick Henry Drive specific plan item is going to be lengthier. It's a bigger plan, and there's another item that would be ideally not heard on the same night. So we are going to be reaching out to see if perhaps January 10th, which is a Monday, is an opportunity for a special hearing to probably just hear one item. So that's something that Elizabeth may be reaching out on. If she hasn't, maybe she has already. I don't think so.
Actually, I did for the
Oh, great.
January 10th. Yeah.
Great.
And we did establish a quorum
Great.
for the 10th.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Okay, thank you. How about city council actions?
Okay, just a few things of interest to the Planning Commission. There were 2 meetings. One was on November 9th. And at that time, there was a study session on the city activity to address the unhoused population. And then the 2 items, project proposals for the transitional housing consideration for the home key and basic services for the cities unhoused were discussed. So there were a number of people that spoke. The 2 projects are the conversion of the Bella Vista Motel on El Camino, and then the other one would be a ground up construction at I think it's 2035 White Oaks Lane.
White Oak.
Yeah, and so essentially the White Oaks Lane one was not supported by council. So that one is, hopefully what the county's doing is reassessing. The council gave direction to look for another site in Santa Clara that was a better fit for that proposal. But the Bella Vista project is continuing through our process. It's a 2-phased project. One is to convert the existing hotel or motel into transitional housing. That's under the county's jurisdiction. So the city doesn't have any review authority over that. And then they would process a 2nd phase, which would be new construction for permanent housing. And that will be going through a state law allowance for, it'll still go through a review process, but it is going through more of the objective standards review. So that's being processed right now. Secondly, they did create a committee for looking at housing and also a homeless task force. So that was approved. The other item that the commission didn't see, but it was an EIR and adoption of statement of overriding consideration for a new data center at 1200 and 1310 Memorex Drive. And so typically this is an architectural review that goes to the development review hearing now with our new ordinance, that threshold, but because it had an EIR with a statement of overriding consideration, and that was related to historic resources being removed and not replaced, it required council action. And so that was approved by the council with various mitigations that were identified for the project. And I think that was it in terms of, the budget amendment just on the El Camino Real specific plan required 5 votes to pass, and it failed 4-2. So that's going to be brought back for additional action. Then on November 16th, yesterday, there was, this is just semi-related to Planning Commission. There's a new tree and shrub best practices regulation. It's really to protect the urban forest. So that staff has been working with the Department of Public Works on that. So that's got provisions related to heritage trees and street trees and when they would be required. Then let's see, the other 2 items, the all electric reach code ordinance was approved 7-0. So that's, again, that was an initiative as part of the climate action plan and just initiated by council as well. Then let's see here. There was a waiver of the first reading and take action on an introduction of ordinances to amend the boards and commissions and the inclusion of a city's housing commission and to establish powers and functions and duties of that commission. And there was also direction on the formation of a homeless task force. So that was approved 6-1. And that's it.
Okay, we have 2 hands up and I apologize. I don't know who came first, so I'm going to go alphabetical and start with Commissioner Cherukuru and then Commissioner Salim. Go ahead,
Thanks,
Commissioner Cherukuru.
So one of the aspects of transitional housing is if the county owns the property, it falls under the county's jurisdiction. So with the housing ballot, one of the options for county is they can go and purchase private property and actually choose to develop the property for transitional housing, and it would not come under the city's purview, although the general plan and so general notifications might come, but just as a knowledge and an awareness that if it's a county-owned property, county has all the right to actually build what under its purview, its guidelines, its processes, whatever it wants to. The city, it's always up. It's like the school district for California state. So we do not govern school districts because they fall under the purview of the state. And so it has always been quite a shocker for many residents not knowing that county supersedes the city's requirements for its own properties. That's one. And just a comment based on your confirmation that the tree ordinance and landscape requirements are somewhere embedded, to include that somewhere as a subset of the zoning ordinance, because it's actually part of land use. So if you're requiring any sort of tree removals or water systems irrigation, that it be embedded, just as a thought, along with other accessory ancillary requirements that the tree replacement or shrubs or landscape requirements or water irrigation all be part of the zoning ordinance package. And along with the option that, yeah, we can put it out at the planning commission counter or planning counter, I think it's more digital. So put it as related links on your web page so that it's legible and or easily accessible for.
Thank you, Commissioner
Thank you. Good idea.
Yeah. Commissioner Salim?
Okay, so since it got brought up at this point, I had a couple of questions. Is there somewhere that's easy to find on the city website for reporting issues of trees popping up the sidewalks or street areas or curbs? Also, is there a plan to, well, actually, these are 2 separate questions. I'll start with that one. Is there a place to report issues?
I believe that's on the My Santa Clara app. That's what is encouraged, how to file all the requests. They get funneled to the right department.
Oh, good. That really needs to be advertised more, because kind of the first time I heard that, and that's a really good pointer.
I think it is on the front page of the website, but it is getting more and more popular because it's very functional.
I normally don't notice it, but when I went to mail my letter at the Kylie post office, there's a drive-through, and there's one huge tree that's just raised up the drive-through, and I actually scraped going over it, and my car's not that low, so it seemed like
not a low rider
challenge. It's a huge tree, so I don't know.
Except that's federal property. Just so you
see,
there it goes.
You just turned it around.
However, we still may deal with the sidewalk if there's a tree, so the city may be able to repair it, but you could certainly submit it, and at least they would at least look into it and see.
Okay. Well, then the second question, which relates to that, is, will the city be applying for any of the infrastructure funds from the federal government, or is that going to go through California state and then down to the cities? Are we going to be able to tap any of the infrastructure things to help our issues? Does anybody know? Sandra?
I think it's kind of early. Yeah, they would have to
A little
look
early
into
to
that.
tell.
It's primarily probably through Public Works. I would think the majority of it, but yeah, I'm sure they're looking at that. And
I
seeing
hope
whether or
so,
not that's
because
available.
there's a lot of places now that I've personally experienced that I go, it's not good for the city and not good for the traffic just to have these issues easily repairable.
Maybe that's something Xander can add on to his SB 8 and 9 or 9 and 10.
And keep
Stuff
piling it on.
outside. Yeah. Okay, that was
Well,
a suggestion, Xander.
you know that what's his name over there in San Jose? The mayor
Sam
Ricardo.
Ricardo.
was there for
Ricardo.
the signing, and you know he was there with his hand out.
Oh yeah.
Obviously, San Jose has their fingers in the cookie jar already.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have to work on that. Okay.
One last question. I swear, I
There you
promise this
go.
is the last one. Do we as a city have any plans to do like some of the other cities in the county to offer rebates for people to convert their lawns for water, for water reduction? Because I think there's
I think there is a program, but to what extent is available? But I know that at one time they did have that, so and that may be continuing. We can I can check into that and let you know.
it's just a point of information that I think it's going to come up starting pretty soon, since we're still in the water shortage. And I'm seeing, you know, the $3,000 incentive to convert your lawn to very low maintenance, and that's, I don't know if our budget could survive it, but it would be something helpful for a lot of the residents.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Salem.
All done.
And then, Yuki, Commissioner Ikezi.
Thank you, Chair. Since Commissioner Chirukuru brought up the county issue, NVIDIA now has that big overpass over San Tomas. Did the city get to review that at all, or is it completely county, because since San Tomas is a county road?
Yeah, thank you, Yuki. Actually, that did go through development review hearing. Rebecca and I both worked on that with NVIDIA, and essentially they have a campus across the street, and they were basically tying the two campuses together, the new one with the existing old one, because they were using a shuttle. They had a private shuttle that was running people back and forth. And just from the danger of crossing the expressway, they decided to do that. And so they did submit a couple designs. We've worked through that for a while. They're using a very decorative type of a modern design that we supported. And just an FYI, the shuttle that they were doing to reduce the travel trips, they were spending about $500,000 a year on that shuttle program. So this will allow folks to walk through one side of the campus to the other safely without getting on the ground. So the county, of course, is involved, but there's not any posts, I believe, that are in county property. It's all on private property, but they participated in the review, and it's now it's approved, and it's in the works right now.
Thank you very much. All right, then I think at this point I will. Yuki, did you have another question? I see your hand still up. No? Okay, then I think at this point, I would entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting to the December 8th meeting.
So moved.
Did I hear a second from Commissioner Harrow?
Second.
Okay.
See you all tomorrow.
Yes, you will. Okay, so I think let me just ask, are there any objections to the adjournment? Hearing none, then the motion passes. Okay, thank you all.
Everybody. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
See you all
Very helpful.
tomorrow.
Good night.
Night. Thank you. See you tomorrow.
Good night. Yes, you will. Bye-bye.
Bye.